The divorce announcement came on a Tuesday morning, which seemed oddly ordinary for something that would fracture Maya Chen's entire world. She was sitting at the kitchen table, spooning cereal into her mouth while watching cartoons on the small television perched on the counter. Her mother Sarah was making fresh squeezed orange juice, something she only did on weekends, and her father Richard was scrolling through his phone, the way he always did during breakfast. Bailey, their golden retriever, lay underneath the table with his head resting on Maya's feet, warm and steady and perfect. Everything felt normal. Everything felt safe. Then her mother turned off the blender. "We need to talk to you about something," Sarah said, her voice higher and tighter than usual. Maya recognized that tone immediately. It was the same voice her mother used when she had to give bad news, like when Bailey had gotten sick 2 years ago, or when they'd found out Grandpa wouldn't be coming for Christmas. Maya's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Her father set down his phone carefully, as if it were made of glass. He stood up and walked around the table to stand next to Sarah, and they exchanged a look that lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. Even at 8 years old, Maya understood that this was rehearsed. They had practiced this conversation without her. "Your mother and I love you very much," Richard began, and those words, that exact combination, made Maya's stomach drop like she was falling. She'd heard those words before in books, in movies, right before everything changed. "But we've decided that we're going to get a divorce." The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Divorce. Maya had heard it whispered by other kids at school. Divorce meant broken homes and sad kids and choosing sides. It meant her friend Emma only seeing her dad every other weekend. It meant tears and arguments and everything being different forever. "This is not about you," her mother added quickly, kneeling down so her face was level with Maya's. "This has nothing to do with anything you did. Sometimes two people just aren't right for each other anymore." But that was a lie, even if her mother didn't know it. Maya had heard them arguing late at night when they thought she was sleeping, her father's voice rising about her mother's career being more important than their family, her mother's sharp responses about how he was controlling and dismissive. These weren't new arguments. They'd been building like a storm for months. Maya had felt them coming the way animals sense earthquakes before they happen. What Maya didn't know yet was how brutal those arguments would become, filtered through lawyers and court documents and custody evaluations. What she didn't know was that in 6 months, her life would become a battlefield. The weeks that followed the announcement were a strange, suffocating blur. Her parents went through the motions of normalcy while everything underneath was being carefully dismantled. They agreed on a trial separation, a word that suggested things might come back together, though Maya could tell from their eyes that they didn't actually believe that. Her father moved to an apartment across town. He still picked her up for school some mornings, still helped with homework some nights, but everything felt temporary and fragile, like he might disappear completely at any moment. Then the lawyers arrived. That's when things changed. When Maya overheard her mother on the phone with her attorney, voice trembling as she discussed her visitation rights. When her father started documenting every moment he spent with her, printing out calendars and keeping receipts. The casual, everyday love that had always existed between them became evidence in a legal case. Her existence became a custody battle. Maya's mother, Sarah, was a trauma surgeon, brilliant and dedicated and often gone for 18-hour shifts. It was her greatest strength, and according to her ex-husband's legal team, her greatest weakness as a parent. Richard's lawyer, a shark-eyed woman named Ms. Morrison, began building a narrative. Sarah was career-obsessed. Sarah was neglecting her daughter. Sarah left a child in the care of nannies and babysitters while she played hero in operating rooms. The fact that Sarah earned enough to provide for their family, that she saved lives, that she had built something remarkable in her career, none of that mattered in the legal framework. Her ambition became her crime. Meanwhile, Richard presented himself as the devoted father. He worked from home several days a week. He attended every school event. He volunteered to coach soccer. He was painting himself as the natural custodian, the parent who understood what a child really needed. What he didn't mention in those legal documents was that his working from home days often involved golf outings with clients, that his presence at school events was usually preceded by fights with Sarah about his schedule, that coaching soccer had started only after his lawyer suggested it might look good in court. But Maya didn't understand any of this strategy and manipulation. She only understood that everything had become about choosing. Teachers asked if she was okay. Her school counselor scheduled meetings. Her parents' friends stopped coming around. The easy warmth of family dinners became loaded confrontations where each parent tried to present their best self while subtly undermining the other. By the time the custody hearing was scheduled for 3 months out, Maya had become something she'd never been before, afraid. Not of monsters under the bed or thunderstorms or needles at the doctor's office. She was afraid of her own life, of what might happen next, of the possibility that she might be split in half like a piece of paper torn by 2 angry hands. She started having stomachaches that made her stay home from school. She began having nightmares where she was being pulled in different directions. She stopped raising her hand in class, stopped playing with her friends at recess, stopped drawing the pictures she used to make constantly. Her 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, sent a note home expressing concern about the dramatic behavioral change. Her parents received it, read it with guilt flickering across their faces, and then went back to their legal preparations. The only constant, the only being who never changed his feelings about her, was Bailey. Bailey had been a puppy when Maya was 3 years old. They'd grown up together, navigating toddlerhood and puppyhood simultaneously. He had been there through first day of kindergarten anxiety, through the nightmare phase when she was 5, through every transition and change. But now, with everything crumbling, he became something more. He became her mirror, her comfort, her only real refuge. She would lie on the living room floor with her face pressed against his golden fur, and he would stay perfectly still, as if he understood that his stillness was more valuable than any movement could be. When she cried silently at night, afraid that one parent or the other would take him away from her, and she'd overheard enough to know this was a real possibility, Bailey would rest his head on her chest, his weight a physical reminder that something solid still existed in her world. In her darkest moments, when she felt completely alone despite being surrounded by people, Bailey was the only being who loved her without conditions, without strategy, without needing her to choose. She didn't know it yet, but this unconditional love would save her. It started on a night when everything felt unbearable. Maya lay in her bed, covers pulled up to her chin, listening to the sound of raised voices drifting up the stairwell. Her parents had agreed, after the lawyer meetings, that the house was neutral territory. They would trade off staying there with Maya while the other lived in the apartment across town. Tonight was one of the transition nights, and her father had come to pick up some of his things. What was supposed to be a quick, civil exchange had erupted into argument. "You're coaching soccer to look good for the judge." Her mother's voice cut through the darkness like a knife. "Don't pretend you suddenly care about her extracurriculars." "At least I'm not working 70-hour weeks and leaving her with strangers," her father shot back. "At least I'm trying to be present." Maya covered her ears with her pillow, but the words seeped through anyway. The same accusations, the same defenses, the same circular argument they'd had 100 times. They weren't talking about her exactly, but they were talking about her. About who was the better parent, who loved her more, who deserved to have her most of the time. It was as if her existence had become a scoreboard in their divorce. Around midnight, when the house finally fell silent and her father's car pulled away, Maya was still awake. Her chest felt tight and strange, like her heart was trying to break out of her ribcage. She couldn't breathe properly. She got out of bed and went downstairs in her pajamas, moving quietly through the dark house. Bailey was in the kitchen in his bed in the corner, but he lifted his head the moment he heard her. Even in the darkness, she could see the glow of his eyes, alert and concerned. He knew something was wrong. Dogs always knew. Maya didn't turn on the light. She moved to Bailey's bed and lay down next to him, her small body curving against his warm, solid form. He adjusted his position immediately, accommodating her, making space for her grief. His fur smelled like sunshine and dog shampoo and home, the only thing in her life that hadn't changed or become complicated or turned into a weapon. "I don't want to choose," she whispered into his fur, tears finally coming. "I don't want to live with just one of them. I don't want either of them to leave. I don't understand why they can't just stop being angry." Bailey didn't answer in words, but he shifted his head to rest it more firmly against her chest, his weight becoming an anchor. She felt the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the slow, certain beat of his heart beneath all that golden fur. In that moment, Bailey was the only being in the world who was completely, unconditionally present with her. They stayed like that for hours, until Maya's eyes grew heavy and her breathing matched his, slow, deep, gradually calmer. The next morning, something shifted in Maya. As she sat at the kitchen table eating toast, watching Bailey eat his breakfast from his bowl, an idea began forming. It was small and fragile at first, but it grew. Bailey understood her. He responded to her. Maybe not in words, but in a language that ran deeper than words. And if she could create a language with Bailey, something that was entirely theirs, something nobody else had taught them or could take away from them, then she would have something real. Something that proved she wasn't alone. That night after her mother came home from her hospital shift, Maya sat on her bedroom floor with Bailey. She decided to experiment. She started with simple things, raising her hand a certain way, making a soft sound. Bailey watched her with his dark, intelligent eyes. Most of it he ignored, the way he ignored her when she was just talking to herself. But then, almost by accident, she made a specific gesture, her hand moving in a slow, swirling motion, like she was drawing something invisible in the air. And she paired it with a soft whistle, barely audible. Bailey's response was immediate and unmistakable. His head lifted sharply, his ears perking forward. He stood up, took a few steps toward her, and pressed the top of his head directly into her palm with surprising force. It was as if he'd been waiting his whole life for exactly this signal. It was as if they'd already had this language all along, and she'd finally found the key to unlock it. Maya's eyes widened. "Bailey," she whispered, "did you do that?" She repeated the gesture. Same swirling motion, same soft whistle. Bailey did it again, pressing his head into her hand with the same urgent intensity. His tail wagged, but not in a playful way. It was a meaningful wag, a confirmation, a yes. Over the following weeks, Maya refined the signal obsessively. She practiced every night in her room, sometimes for an hour at a time. She adjusted the hand movement until it was smooth and quick, something she could do without thinking. She modified the whistle until it was a specific pitch that only Bailey seemed to hear, or at least respond to. She experimented with variations, learning which movements made him respond most strongly, which combination of gesture and sound created the most immediate, most devoted response. What fascinated her most was how Bailey never tired of it. Every single time she made the signal, he responded with the same complete focus, the same devotion. There was no inconsistency, no judgment, no impatience. When she made the signal, Bailey acted like it was the most important thing in the universe, like she was the most important thing in the universe. She began to understand that this wasn't a trick. It wasn't trained behavior. It was communication. Real, authentic, meaningful communication between two beings who truly saw each other. In a world where everyone around her was lying, her parents lying about loving her while destroying everything, lawyers lying about what was best for her, teachers lying about everything being okay, Bailey never lied. When she made the signal, he was telling her the truth. "I'm here. I see you. I understand." On the night before the custody hearing was scheduled, Maya sat with Bailey in her room, both of them bathed in the soft light from her bedside lamp. The hearing terrified her. She would have to sit in front of a judge and lawyers and answer questions about which parent she preferred. She would have to choose, or seem to choose, or have the choice made for her. The weight of it pressed down on her like a physical thing. She made the signal, the swirling gesture, the soft whistle. Bailey responded instantly, pressing his head against her knee, his eyes locking onto hers with absolute certainty. "That's it," Maya whispered, understanding something fundamental in that moment. "We do this. Tomorrow we do this. And they'll understand. They'll have to understand." She wasn't sure how a silent signal between a child and a dog could change anything in a courtroom. She wasn't old enough to understand courtroom dynamics or the psychology of judges or the power of unscripted human emotion. But she knew, with the kind of deep certainty that children sometimes possess, that this thing between her and Bailey was real. It was true, and truth, somehow, had to matter. They practiced one more time as midnight approached. The signal, the response, the connection that needed no words because it transcended language entirely. Bailey never wavered, his devotion never questioned, his presence never failed. When Maya finally fell asleep, Bailey remained beside her, his watchful eyes staying open long into the night, standing guard over her rest like a soldier on duty. The morning of the hearing, Maya woke before dawn. She hadn't really slept. She'd spent the night in that strange twilight between consciousness and dreams, her mind cycling through worst-case scenarios. What if the judge decided she had to live with only her father? What if her mother lost? What if Bailey was somehow taken away? What if she said something wrong and made everything worse? The anxiety lived in her chest like a living thing, pressing against her ribs, making each breath shallow and difficult. Her mother knocked softly on the bedroom door at 6 in the morning. Sarah stood in the doorway in her work clothes, professional navy blazer, dark pants, hair carefully styled. She looked like someone going to battle, which Maya realized she was. This day could determine the shape of her entire life, and her mother's. "Good morning, baby," Sarah said, her voice trying hard to sound normal, cheerful even, but not quite succeeding. "We need to get ready. The hearing is at 9. 3 hours. Maya had 3 hours to transform from this anxious, trembling 8-year-old into someone who could sit in front of a judge and answer impossible questions without falling apart. She got out of bed mechanically, moving through her bathroom routine like a robot. Shower, teeth brushed. The modest navy dress her mother had bought specifically for this day, the one meant to make her look innocent and sympathetic, though Maya was beginning to understand that judges probably weren't fooled by what children wore. Bailey followed her through all of this, staying close, never taking his eyes off her. He knew something momentous was happening. Dogs always sensed when the world was about to shift. Breakfast was impossible. Her mother made her favorite pancakes, but Maya could only push them around her plate. Every bite felt like it might come back up. Her mother tried to make conversation, asking about school, about the soccer game on Saturday, about anything except what was about to happen. But the words all felt hollow, and they both knew it. They were going through motions, performing normalcy for each other when everything was falling apart. At 7:30, her mother's attorney, Mr. James, arrived to pick them up. He was a kind man in his 50s with gentle eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen enough human suffering to have developed genuine compassion. He brought with him the formal legal documents in a leather briefcase, and the sight of it made the hearing feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. "You're going to do great," he told Maya, kneeling down to her level. "Just answer the questions honestly, okay? There are no trick questions. The judge just wants to understand what you need." But that was the problem, wasn't it? Maya didn't know what she needed. She needed both her parents. She needed her family to be whole again. She needed to stop being the pawn in a game she never asked to play. And apparently none of those things were available options. The drive to the courthouse took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. They were mostly silent, with occasional attempts at reassurance that fell flat. Her mother held her hand in the back seat. Bailey lay across both their laps, his presence somehow making it slightly more bearable. Mr. James drove carefully, and Maya noticed he kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror with compassion. As they turned onto the main street leading to the courthouse, Maya's stomach seized. Even from 2 blocks away, she could see them. News vans with satellite dishes on top, reporters standing with microphones, cameras on tripods. Her father's prominence in the tech community had made this case interesting to the media. A bitter custody battle involving a wealthy executive and an accomplished trauma surgeon, playing out in public, complete with all the dramatic elements that made good television. "Oh God," her mother whispered, her grip on Maya's hand tightening. "I'll get you through the back," Mr. James said, but they all knew there would be cameras waiting there too. The courthouse building was massive and imposing, all white stone and marble steps that seemed to stretch up forever. It looked like a place where important things happened, where justice was determined, where children's futures were decided. It looked absolutely terrifying. As they approached, the reporters surged forward, cameras flashed, questions were shouted. "Ms. Chen, do you think you'll get primary custody? Is it true your ex-husband claims you're neglecting your daughter? How is your daughter handling all of this?" Maya wanted to disappear. Her mother pulled her closer, trying to shield her with her body, but there were too many cameras, too many microphones, too much noise. Mr. James put himself between them and the reporters, clearing a path with quiet authority. "No comment. The family requests privacy during this difficult time." But the cameras kept flashing. Somewhere, Maya realized a photographer had captured her fear. Somewhere, her trembling chin and her wide, frightened eyes were being recorded for the evening news. This wasn't private. This wouldn't stay in the safety of a courtroom. This would be public, shared, commented on by strangers. They climbed the marble steps, and with each one the enormity of what was about to happen pressed down harder. The courthouse doors were heavy and tall, opening onto a hallway that echoed with footsteps and whispered conversations. Men and women in business suits moved with purpose. There was the smell of old wood and something sterile, like floor polish. The walls were pale gray, institutional, cold. Nothing about this place felt like it belonged to childhood. Nothing about it felt safe. As they checked in and moved through security, Mr. James explained what would happen. They would wait in the courtroom's hallway. Maya's court-appointed advocate, Mr. Patterson, would meet with her to explain the process. At 9 o'clock, they would enter the courtroom. The judge would make opening remarks. Her father's attorney would present their case first, calling witnesses and presenting evidence that Maya's mother was inadequate. Then her mother's attorney would respond. And then came the part that made Maya's legs feel weak. She would be called to testify. "You'll sit in the witness box," Mr. Patterson explained when he arrived, a younger man with kind eyes. "The judge will be up there." He pointed to show her the elevated bench. "The lawyers will ask you questions from down here. It might feel scary, but you're very brave and you're going to do wonderfully." Everyone kept saying she was brave, but Maya didn't feel brave. She felt terrified. Then came the moment that changed everything slightly. "We're bringing Bailey in as your emotional support animal," her mother said. "The judge approved it this morning. He'll be right there with you, okay? You won't be alone." When Bailey arrived, certified and official with his service vest, Maya felt something crack open inside her. It was still terrifying, but it was slightly less unbearable, because at least she would have Bailey. At least when she made the signal, when she called out to him silently, he would be there to answer. The clock showed 8:55. In 5 minutes, they would enter the courtroom. In 5 minutes, everything would change. The courtroom was smaller than Maya expected and also somehow larger. The ceiling stretched impossibly high and the wood paneling made everything echo. There were maybe 30 people scattered throughout the rows of seats: reporters, lawyers' assistants, court observers, the curious and the obligated. But as Maya entered in her navy dress, holding Mr. Patterson's hand, all those faces blurred into an undifferentiated mass of strangers watching her, judging her, waiting to see what she would say. Bailey walked beside her, his service vest official and official-looking, but even his presence couldn't quite dispel the wrongness of her being here, in this room, about to be questioned about which parent she loved more. The judge was already seated at her elevated bench, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and eyes that looked like they had seen too much human weakness to be impressed by anything. Judge Patricia Morrison had handled hundreds of custody cases, and her expression suggested she found most of them tedious. But when she looked at Maya, something flickered, a moment of recognition that a child was about to be put through an ordeal, followed immediately by a return to her neutral mask. "Maya Chen," Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying easily through the courtroom despite her seeming lack of effort. "You're going to sit in that chair there and we're going to ask you some questions. Bailey will sit right there at your feet. Do you understand?" Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. She walked to the witness box on wooden legs that didn't feel like they belonged to her. The chair was larger than she was, and she had to sit with her feet not quite touching the ground, swinging slightly. Bailey settled at her feet, his weight solid and real against her shins. Her mother sat on one side of the courtroom with her attorney, Mr. James. Her father sat on the other side with his attorney, Ms. Morrison, a different Morrison from the judge, though Maya found herself confusing them anyway. Ms. Morrison was probably in her late 40s, with sharp features and sharper eyes. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit and had the bearing of someone who had learned to weaponize authority. The judge explained the oath, that Maya had to tell the truth, that lying in court was a serious matter. Maya raised her hand and swore, the words feeling meaningless even as she said them. She was 8. She didn't fully understand what any of this meant. Mr. James went first, asking gentle questions. Did she love both her parents? Yes. Did they both love her? Yes. Did she enjoy spending time with her mother? Yes. With her father? Yes. His questions felt like softballs designed to make her comfortable, to get her used to speaking, but Maya could feel the real interrogation waiting in the wings. It came with Ms. Morrison's first question. "Maya, I want to ask you about a typical weeknight with your mother. What time does she get home from work?" Maya's mind went blank. She didn't have a typical weeknight. The schedule changed constantly. Sometimes her mother was there for dinner. Sometimes she worked late. Sometimes there were emergency surgeries in the middle of the night. Different times," Maya said, hearing how uncertain she sounded. "Different times," Ms. Morrison repeated, as if this was evidence of some great crime. "Can you give me a specific example? On the nights your mother has custody, what time does she usually arrive home?" "Sometimes 6, sometimes later, sometimes a lot later." Ms. Morrison walked toward the judge's bench, then back toward the witness box, her heels clicking against the floor in a way that seemed designed to make Maya more nervous. "And when your mother is working late, who is taking care of you?" "Our nanny, Mrs. Chen. She lives with us most nights." "So you're being raised by a nanny while your mother pursues her career. That must be difficult." Mr. James stood up. "Objection, that's argumentative." The judge sustained the objection, but the damage was done. The implication had been planted. Maya was being neglected, raised by a substitute parent, sacrificed to her mother's ambition. The questions kept coming, each one designed to paint a picture of maternal absence. "Does your mother attend your soccer games?" "Sometimes she tries, but..." "Yes or no, please." "No, not usually." "Does your father attend?" "Yes, he coaches." "And who helps you with homework?" "Mostly Mom does, or Mrs. Chen." "But not consistently your mother. There's uncertainty in your voice." By this point, Maya's hands were shaking. She looked down at Bailey and he looked back up at her with those dark, knowing eyes. She wanted to make the signal their signal, but this wasn't the moment. Not yet. Not while everything was still mostly okay. But Ms. Morrison was just getting started. "Now, Maya, I want to ask you something very important, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. If you could choose, and you can choose, you know, judges always listen to what children want. Would you prefer to live primarily with your mother or your father?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. This was the trap. This was the moment she'd been dreading. She looked at her mother, whose eyes were pleading. She looked at her father, whose expression was carefully neutral but whose body language screamed hope and desperation. She looked at the judge, who was watching her with something that might have been sympathy or might have been nothing at all. I don't want to choose," Maya whispered. "I understand this is difficult," Ms. Morrison said in a voice that didn't sound understanding at all. "But the reality is that you do have to choose, or at least you have to express a preference. So I'm asking again, which parent would you rather live with?" "I love them both equally." "That's not what I asked. Which parent do you see more often? Which parent helps you with homework? Which parent attends your school events? Based on those facts, which parent is more present in your life?" Maya felt tears starting to burn at the corners of her eyes. Her throat was closing. This wasn't fair. Why were they making her do this? Why did loving both parents make her some kind of problem that needed to be solved through legal questioning? "I don't want to answer that," she said, her voice getting smaller. "I don't want to say one is better than the other. That's not. I love my mom. I love my dad. I don't want to choose." "Your Honor," Ms. Morrison said, turning to the judge, "the child is refusing to cooperate with testimony." "She's 8 years old," Mr. James shot back, standing again. "She's emotionally distressed. This is exactly why these tactics are." "That's enough," the judge said, holding up her hand. "Ms. Morrison, I think we've established the child's schedule. I believe we have sufficient information." But it was too late. Something inside Maya had broken. The tears came then flooding out without permission. Her chest heaved. She couldn't breathe properly. The room seemed to tilt and spin around her. Her mother stood up, moving toward her, but the bailiff gently blocked her way. This was a courtroom. There were rules. Even a terrified, crying child had to follow the rules. Maya made the signal then, desperate, unplanned, the swirling hand gesture with the soft whistle. Bailey responded immediately, his entire body tensing with concern. He stood, pressing against her legs, his head trying to reach her lap. But even his presence couldn't stop the panic that was consuming her. She was drowning in this room full of strangers. She was drowning in impossible choices. She was drowning in the machinery of a system that was supposed to protect her, but instead was tearing her apart. The judge looked down from her bench, her stern expression finally cracking. She could see a child in complete emotional distress. She could see Bailey struggling to help her. She could see that something had gone fundamentally wrong. "I'm calling a recess," Judge Morrison said firmly. 30 minutes, everyone remain in the building." As Mr. Patterson came to get her, Maya felt the world going dark at the edges. She was 8 years old, and she had just been destroyed by the very system meant to protect her. The recess had been declared for 30 minutes, but the clock seemed to move differently in time. An hour could have passed, or 3 minutes, Maya couldn't tell. She sat in a small consultation room off the main hallway with Mr. Patterson and her mother, who held her while she shook. Her mother's hand moved in slow circles on her back, a rhythm as old as Maya's life, but it couldn't quite calm the trembling that had taken root deep in her bones. "I can't go back in there," Maya whispered into her mother's shoulder. "I can't do it. I can't choose. Why do they make me choose?" Her mother didn't have an answer because there was no good answer. The system was broken. It was designed for adults, by adults, and children simply had to endure it. Bailey lay against Maya's legs, his eyes moving between her face and her mother's, deeply troubled. He sensed her distress the way he always did, with an intuition that transcended normal animal awareness. He knew something fundamental had shifted. He knew his girl was drowning, and he couldn't help her because the thing hurting her existed in a realm beyond his ability to protect against. 20 minutes into the recess, Mr. Patterson stepped out to check on the judge's timeline. Maya's mother held her, rocking slightly, and they existed in that small room in absolute silence, the kind of silence that comes after everything has been said that can be said. Then the 20-minute mark came and went. An assistant poked her head in. "The judge is ready. They're filing back into the courtroom." Maya's mother kissed the top of her head. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to say," she whispered. "Whatever happens, I love you. That's what matters, not what you say in there, me loving you." But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. What Maya said in there would matter very much to both parents, to the judge, to the trajectory of her entire life. They walked back into the courtroom. The reporters were still outside, the observers still seated in their designated rows. But something felt different this time. Perhaps it was just Maya's perception, sensitized by trauma, but the atmosphere seemed to have shifted. The judge looked at her with something other than judicial distance. Even Ms. Morrison's expression had softened slightly, perhaps, Maya thought, because even she had witnessed something in that recess that made her reevaluate. The judge spoke first. "Maya, I want you to know that you don't have to answer any questions you don't feel comfortable with. Do you understand?" Maya nodded, unsure what this meant. Was the hearing over? Were they going home? "We're going to continue," the judge said, "but we're going to take a different approach. I want you to simply talk about your life, about what makes you happy, about what you need. Don't worry about choosing or comparing your parents, just talk to me about you. All right?" It was a lifeline, though a fragile one. Mr. James stood to ask questions, and his voice was gentler this time. "Maya, I want to know about Bailey. Tell me about Bailey." And something shifted in Maya's chest. She looked down at the dog beside her, and for the first time since entering the courtroom she felt something other than fear. She felt love. Simple, uncomplicated, overwhelming love. Bailey lifted his head, as if summoned by her gaze. "Bailey," Maya began, her voice still shaky but gaining strength, "Bailey has been with me my whole life, since I was a baby. He understands me, like he really understands. When I'm sad, he knows. When I'm scared, he's there. He doesn't care if my mom is working late or if my dad forgot something. He's just there, always. He's the only thing that's always been the same." As she spoke, something profound began happening inside her. The words unlocked something, and she realized that what she was describing wasn't just a pet. It was the one constant in her fractured world. The one being who loved her without condition, without agenda, without asking anything of her except her presence. And in that realization, she understood what she needed to do. She didn't consciously decide to make the signal. It simply happened as naturally as breathing. Her hand rose, fingers beginning that familiar swirling motion, the gesture she and Bailey had perfected over weeks of midnight rehearsals. And the whistle came, soft and specific, perfectly pitched to those ears that had learned to recognize it as a call of absolute importance. Bailey's response was instantaneous and complete. His entire body stiffened with attention. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that eliminated everything else from his universe. He stood, moving closer to her chair, and placed his head directly on her knee, not gently, but with purpose, with the weight of devotion, with the physical manifestation of saying, "I am here. I see you. I understand." Time stopped. The courtroom, which had been a place of anxiety and danger and impossible questions, suddenly became something else entirely. It became a stage for pure, unfiltered human emotion. And not even human emotion, something beyond that, something transcendent. Maya and Bailey were no longer performing. They were simply being. The signal wasn't a trick or a trained response that had been coaxed out of an animal. It was communication in its rawest, truest form. It was a child and a dog saying to each other, "I know you. You know me. We are safe together." The stenographer's fingers had stopped moving over her machine. The reporters who had filled the gallery seats forward, sensing something momentous. Ms. Morrison's face had gone completely still, her adversarial expression replaced by something that looked almost like understanding. Maya's mother had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Her father stood slowly, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, he looked truly, genuinely shocked. Not shocked that his daughter was being loved, but shocked that he was witnessing it so completely, so unambiguously, so beyond the reach of legal argument. The judge leaned forward on her bench, watching the interaction with undisguised emotion. What made this moment so extraordinary wasn't the signal itself. It wasn't the novelty of a dog responding to a gesture. It was what the signal revealed, the emotional truth that no amount of questioning could extract, the authentic bond that no lawyer could argue away, the simple fact that this child was suffering and clinging to the only being in her world who offered unconditional love. The room understood in that moment that they had witnessed something precious and rare. They had witnessed what real love looked like when stripped of pretense, when removed from the courtroom's adversarial framework, when expressed in the language between a child and an animal who truly saw each other. Maya made the signal again, and Bailey's response was identical. That same complete focus, that same devotion, that same absolute presence. And again. And again. Each time Bailey answered with perfect consistency, perfect love, perfect clarity. The judge watched and her stern face crumbled slightly. A reporter wept openly. Even the court officers seemed moved. These professionals who had seen the worst of human nature played out in custody disputes suddenly confronted with the best of it. Unconditional love, radical acceptance, authentic connection. In that succession of signals and responses, something shifted in the room's collective understanding. Nobody needed lawyers to explain what they were seeing. Nobody needed judges to interpret it. What they were witnessing transcended legal argument and entered the realm of pure, undeniable human and canine truth. Bailey's head remained on Maya's knee, his eyes never wavering from hers. And in that gaze was everything, all the love, all the understanding, all the healing that a child could possibly need. The silence that followed was absolute and complete. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Nobody dared break the spell that had descended over the courtroom like a benediction. Time existed differently in this moment, suspended, sacred, eternal. This was the kind of silence that happens when human beings witness something that transcends explanation, something that reaches into the deepest parts of themselves and demands to be acknowledged. Maya continued to make the signal. Not frantically but calmly, repeatedly, with the confidence of someone who had practiced this thousands of times. Her hand moved in that now familiar swirling gesture. The whistle, soft but penetrating, audible throughout the courtroom, came with perfect consistency. And Bailey responded each time with unwavering devotion, his head pressing against her knee, his eyes never leaving her face, his entire being communicating a single message. You matter. You are loved. I am here. The reporters in the back row were no longer taking notes. They had stopped because what they were witnessing couldn't be reduced to words on a page. A woman in the third row openly wept, her shoulders shaking. One of the court officers, a man who'd worked custody cases for 15 years and had developed a thick skin against emotion, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, pretending he wasn't. Maya's father stood rooted to his spot, his expression unreadable but his body language screaming a kind of shock and recognition that seemed to crack something open inside him. He had come to court believing he was the better parent, the more present parent, the one who truly understood his daughter's needs. And he had built that case methodically, carefully, with the help of an attorney who knew exactly how to paint her mother as a career-obsessed failure. But in this moment, watching his daughter communicate with her dog in a language he had never known existed, he understood something terrifying. His daughter was not thriving under his care or his mother's. She was drowning, and the thing keeping her afloat wasn't either of them. It was Bailey. The realization seemed to physically strike him. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched into fists and then released. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since the divorce began, not as a pawn in his custody case, but as an actual human being who was suffering. Maya's mother couldn't stop crying, but her tears had shifted from the desperate, terrified tears of the recess into something else. These were tears of recognition, of witnessing her daughter's truth laid bare, of seeing that her child had developed a coping mechanism so beautiful and so heartbreaking that it revealed the fundamental failure of both parents to adequately hold her through this crisis. The judge's face had transformed entirely. The stern, impartial expression that had served her well through hundreds of cases had completely dissolved. What replaced it was raw humanity, the recognition that a child was in pain, that the system she represented had contributed to that pain, and that no amount of legal precedent could address what she was witnessing. Ms. Morrison, the aggressive attorney who had systematized cruelty in her questioning, stood motionless with her mouth slightly open. Her pen had dropped to the table sometime during the signal's repetition. She looked, for the first time since entering the courtroom, like something other than a predatory professional. She looked like a human being confronted with evidence of a child's suffering, and it appeared to be breaking something inside her. The silence stretched on. Maya made the signal again. Bailey responded. And the repetition of it, the perfect, unshakable consistency of it began to feel like prayer, like a ritual, like a child and a dog speaking a truth that the entire legal system had failed to hear. I am still here. I still matter. Someone still loves me without qualification. Stop, the judge said, her voice quiet but carrying through the entire room. But she didn't mean stop the signal. She meant stop everything else. Stop the fighting. Stop the positioning. Stop the machinery of adversarial law for just one moment and look at what was actually happening. She leaned back in her chair, her judicial robe shifting, and for just a moment she looked like a woman, not a judge. A woman who had made mistakes in her career by treating children like exhibits in legal cases rather than human beings with real emotional needs. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. One of the junior attorneys for the father's legal team stood to object to something, but his supervisor placed a hand on his arm, shaking his head minutely. Whatever legal strategy they had been pursuing was pointless now. Obsolete. Dead. Mr. James, Maya's mother's attorney, sat back in his chair with an expression of profound relief. He had known from the beginning that no argument he could make would be as powerful as the simple truth of his client's daughter's pain. And here it was, laid bare for everyone in the room to witness. What struck everyone, though they couldn't have articulated it at the time, was not just the signal itself, but what it represented. This wasn't a trained trick that had been coaxed out of a dog through repetition and rewards. This was authentic communication. This was a child who had taken her pain and her isolation and her desperate need to be understood, and she had created a language that nobody could argue away, nobody could cross-examine, nobody could reduce to evidence in a legal case. The signal continued. Bailey continued his response. And with each repetition, it became clearer to everyone in that room that they were witnessing something sacred. Not in a religious sense, necessarily, but in a human sense. They were witnessing unconditional love made visible. They were witnessing a connection so pure and so necessary that it transcended the adversarial nature of the courtroom entirely. A photographer's camera flashed, the first sound other than Maya's whistle and Bailey's movement in several minutes. The flash seemed to break the spell slightly, everyone suddenly remembering where they were. But the impact remained. Whatever happened next in this trial, whatever legal arguments would be made, whatever custody arrangements would be negotiated, everyone in that room would carry this moment forward. Bailey's head remained on Maya's knee. Her hand continued to rest on his fur. Their eyes remained locked, seeing each other completely, understanding each other perfectly. The judge looked at both parents, then at the attorneys, then back at the child and her dog. "I'm calling a recess," she said, her voice steady now but carrying the weight of a decision that had already been made at some level deeper than rational thought. 1 hour, all parties to remain available. I want both parents and their attorneys in my chambers in 30 minutes. We are not continuing this trial as currently structured. As everyone began to move, gathering papers, making calls, beginning the whispered conversations that would fill the next hour, one thing became clear. The courtroom had stopped operating under the old rules. Something had fundamentally shifted in the collective understanding of everyone present. A child's authentic pain, made manifest through her bond with an animal, had done what no lawyer's argument could do. It had made everyone present see the truth. The judge's chambers were smaller than the courtroom, but somehow felt more powerful. Rich mahogany wood, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal precedents and case files, a window overlooking the city below. Judge Patricia Morrison sat behind her desk, and for the first time, she wasn't wearing her judicial robe. She looked smaller without it, more human, but also somehow more authoritative, as if the authority came from her character rather than her position. Both parents had been summoned separately for preliminary conversations, but now, unusually, Judge Morrison had requested that they both be present with their attorneys at the same time. This alone was extraordinary. Adversarial custody hearings kept the parties separated, kept emotions from boiling over. But the judge had made a deliberate choice to break that protocol. Sarah sat on one side of the room, her posture rigid, her eyes red from crying. Richard sat on the other side, looking shell-shocked, as if the reality of what his daughter was experiencing had only just begun to penetrate his careful construct of legal arguments. Between them, physically and spiritually, was an absence, the space where Maya should have been, the weight of her suffering that now hung over everything. "I'm going to speak frankly," Judge Morrison began, removing her glasses and setting them on her desk. "And I'm going to do something I've rarely done in my 23 years on the bench. I'm going to suspend the normal adversarial structure of this custody hearing." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of someone who had made a profound realization. "In the courtroom today, I witnessed something that no legal argument, no carefully prepared testimony, no financial analysis of who is more fit to parent could possibly address. I witnessed a child in genuine emotional distress. Not temporary distress, chronic, severe, psychological distress caused by being used as a pawn in a legal battle between two people who claimed to love her." She turned back to face them. "I have read the psychological evaluations. Both of you are adequate parents in isolation. Ms. Chen, you are a brilliant surgeon who saves lives. You have devoted your career to healing. But your work schedule has been weaponized against you in this courtroom, when in reality your daughter is proud of you. You are her hero. Mr. Chen, you are involved in your daughter's daily life, which is admirable. But your involvement appears to be motivated, at least partially, by this custody battle rather than by genuine parental instinct." Both parents flinched at this assessment. "What I witnessed today," the judge continued, "was a child who has created a coping mechanism so sophisticated, so heartbreaking, and so beautiful that it exposes the fundamental failure of both of you to adequately hold her through this crisis. Your daughter has bonded so completely with her dog that the dog has become her primary emotional support system. Do you understand what that means? It means she trusts an animal more than she trusts either of you to meet her emotional needs." The silence that followed was devastating. "I am making several decisions," Judge Morrison said, moving back to her desk and pulling out a legal pad. "First, I am declaring a moratorium on this trial as currently structured. No more adversarial questioning of the child. No more legal warfare over custody." Ms. Morrison, the father's attorney, started to object, but the judge held up her hand. "I'm not finished. Second, I am ordering immediate family therapy for all parties, both parents and the child. This is non-negotiable. If either parent refuses, it will be reflected in any future custody determination. Third," she continued, "I am ruling that any custody arrangement, and I do mean any arrangement, whether joint custody, primary custody, visitation, must preserve and protect the child's relationship with her emotional support dog. Bailey is not a convenience. Bailey is therapeutic equipment that has become necessary for this child's psychological well-being. Separating them would constitute a form of psychological abuse." Richard's attorney leaned over to whisper something to him, but he waved her away, his attention entirely on the judge. "Fourth," Judge Morrison said, and her voice became even more firm, "I want you both to understand something about what I witnessed. That signal, that gesture and whistle that your daughter uses to communicate with her dog, that is not a trained response. That is not a trick. That is two beings communicating in a language of pure, unconditional love. And that language revealed something that all your legal arguments could not. Your daughter is suffering, and she is suffering because of this litigation." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into first one parent, then the other. "I have seen custody battles tear families apart. I have seen children damaged by the machinery of law. But I have rarely seen a child love an animal the way your daughter loves that dog, because I have rarely seen a custody case strip a child so completely of the reliable adult presence she needs." Sarah's shoulders shook with quiet sobbing. Richard looked like he was going to be sick. "Here is what will happen," the judge said, returning to her official tone. "You will both engage in mediation, with a mediator I will appoint. That mediator will help you develop a custody arrangement based on your daughter's actual needs rather than either parent's desires. Your daughter's therapist will be involved in those negotiations, and any arrangement you arrive at must include the following non-negotiable elements. Bailey remains with your daughter at all times. Your daughter's work schedule. Yes, her work schedule, because she is 8 years old and her primary work is being a child and a student, will take priority over both of your professional schedules. Family therapy will occur twice weekly for a minimum of 6 months, and both of you will participate in individual therapy addressing your roles in this custody conflict." She stood again, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'm also issuing a protective order. No media contact regarding this case. The fact that a child's private emotional distress was exposed to photographers and reporters is a failure of this entire system, and I will not allow it to continue." As the attorneys began gathering papers and both parents stood to leave, the judge spoke once more. "One final thing," she said quietly. "I want both of you to really consider what you saw today. Your daughter didn't choose between you. She didn't express a preference. Instead, she communicated with an animal in a way that transcended all of your legal arguments. That's not a failure on her part. That's a failure on ours, on your parts as parents, on my part as a judge, on all of our parts as a society that allowed a child to be so desperate that she had to create a secret language just to feel loved." The room was absolutely silent. "You are dismissed," the judge said. "Report back to me in 1 week with a mediation agreement proposal. If you cannot arrive at one amicably, I will impose one myself, and I assure you, it will be far less favorable to either of you than what you could negotiate together." As both parents filed out, neither looked at each other, but something had fundamentally shifted in the room's atmosphere. The adversarial positioning had collapsed. The legal strategies had become irrelevant. What remained was the simple, undeniable truth that a child was suffering and that both parents had a responsibility to stop the suffering they had created. Outside the chambers in the hallway, Sarah and Richard passed each other without speaking. But their eyes met for just a moment, and in that moment was recognition. They had both failed their daughter, and they both would have to find a way to make it right. 3 months after the hearing, Maya sat in her school's library with a laptop in front of her, typing an essay for an assignment Mrs. Patterson, her third-grade teacher, had given to the class. The assignment was simple: write about a time when something changed in your life. Maya's essay would be different from her classmates, though none of them knew the full story yet. Her life had changed. Completely, fundamentally, in ways that were still unfolding like a flower that had been frozen in ice and was only now learning to bloom again. The first change had come during the mediation sessions. Both of her parents had shown up, not with lawyers but with genuine humility. The mediator, a wise woman named Dr. Alina Chen, no relation to the family, had helped them develop a custody arrangement that was truly remarkable. Instead of splitting the week or the month, they had decided on a different approach. Maya would spend weeknights with her mother, whose work schedule allowed for more consistent evening presence due to her negotiations with the hospital. Weekends would be shared between both parents equally. And critically, Bailey would remain with Maya at all times, traveling between households in a specially designed dog carrier that made him comfortable and secure. But the custody agreement was only the scaffolding. The real change came through therapy. Richard had entered individual therapy first, confronting his own childhood abandonment issues that had driven his aggressive pursuit of custody. He realized that his need to win, Maya, had more to do with his need to not be alone than with her actual well-being. His therapist, Dr. Marcus Webb, helped him understand that loving a child sometimes meant getting out of the way, meant supporting the other parent, meant recognizing that controlling custody didn't equal genuine connection. Sarah had entered therapy confronting her own guilt and perfectionism. She had internalized the narrative that her career made her a bad mother, that she should somehow be able to work 70-hour weeks and still be present in every moment. Her therapist, Dr. Yolanda Martinez, helped her understand that she could be both, a devoted surgeon and a devoted mother, but not by trying to do both at the same level simultaneously. She renegotiated her hospital schedule, reducing her surgical cases to allow for more predictable evenings at home. She discovered that she could save lives and be present for her daughter's life without sacrificing either. But the most remarkable transformation was Maya's. Within the first month of the new arrangement, her teacher noticed her raising her hand in class again. Within 2 months, she was playing with friends at recess. By the 3-month mark, Mrs. Patterson pulled her mother aside to say, "I don't know what you changed, but I have my student back. The light is back in her eyes." The family therapy sessions had been the most challenging for everyone, but also the most healing. Dr. Alina Chen had guided Maya's parents in expressing their love for her directly, without defensiveness, without legal framing. She had helped them apologize, genuinely apologize, for using their daughter as a weapon in their war with each other. "I'm sorry," Richard had said during one session, his voice breaking, "that I loved the idea of having you more than I loved actually being present with you. I'm sorry that I was trying to win something instead of just being your dad." Sarah had added, "I'm sorry that I let guilt about my career make me invisible when I was home. I'm sorry that I didn't fight harder to protect you from this whole process." And Maya, with Bailey's head resting on her lap, had simply nodded. The signal wasn't necessary anymore. Healing required words now, required her parents to be vulnerable in ways that legal arguments never could be. The case had attracted national attention. Legal scholars began writing about it, calling it the Bailey precedent, a case that challenged the traditional adversarial custody framework and demonstrated the power of prioritizing a child's emotional well-being over parental positioning. Several states began reviewing their custody determination processes. Child psychologists cited the case in arguments for more trauma-informed family law. But more importantly, Maya's story had touched something in the public consciousness. Hundreds of families reached out to the judge's office with their own stories of custody battles that had damaged their children. Therapists reported increased requests for family therapy. Lawyers began reconsidering their aggressive tactics in custody cases, wondering if their strategies were actually helping or harming the children they claimed to be protecting. 4 months after the hearing, a documentary filmmaker approached the family about telling their story. Both parents agreed, but only under one condition. The focus had to be on what they had done wrong, what they had learned, and how other families could avoid the same damage. It wasn't a story about winning. It was a story about healing. The documentary aired on a streaming platform 6 months later, and it became one of the most-watched documentaries about family law and custody that year. Parents wept watching it. Judges watched it in continuing education courses. Law students debated it in classrooms across the country. But for Maya, the most important outcome was simpler. She was happy. She got to live with both her parents, not because they were fighting over her, but because they had learned to cooperate for her sake. Bailey attended both homes, his presence a physical reminder of the bond that had saved them all. She got to attend her mother's medical conferences sometimes, proud of her surgeon mom. She got to attend her father's company events occasionally, proud of her executive dad. And most importantly, she got to be a kid again, to play, to learn, to grow without the weight of impossible choices crushing her chest. As a teenager, years after the hearing, Maya would write an essay for her high school literature class titled The Language of Love. In it, she reflected on that moment in the courtroom when she made the signal that changed everything. "People talk about words as the most important form of communication," she wrote. "But that's not true. Words can lie. Words can be weapons. Words can be used to manipulate and control. But the language between me and Bailey, the signal we had created, couldn't lie. It could only speak truth. And that truth, that someone loved me completely, without condition, without agenda, was what broke through all the adult arguments and made everyone finally listen." She continued, "My parents didn't realize until the hearing that they had been so focused on winning the custody case that they had stopped actually being parents. They had stopped seeing me. But Bailey saw me. Bailey always saw me. And when I made that signal in the courtroom, everyone finally understood what I had been trying to tell them all along. I needed both my parents, and I needed them to stop fighting each other and start fighting for me instead." The essay earned her a scholarship to a prestigious university, and her story was included in a collection of essays about unconventional family structures and healing from divorce trauma. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came on the day of her high school graduation, when both of her parents sat together in the audience, not as adversaries, but as friends who had learned to co-parent with respect and love. Bailey, now aging gracefully as an older dog, sat between them, and when Maya walked across the stage, both parents understood that this moment belonged to their daughter, not to either of them individually. After the ceremony, as Maya hugged them both, she looked down at Bailey and smiled. No signal was necessary. She had given them something better than an impossible choice. She had given them the opportunity to choose love, and they had finally taken it. The end.